Today, I'm interviewing KMO, who is the author of the book Fear and Loathing in the Kuiper Belt, and he writes the Substack newsletter, Gen X Science Fiction and Futurism. I recently appeared on KMO's podcast to talk about my book, The Singularity Survival Guide, and today I want to discuss a few of his recent articles, which I have found very thought-provoking. KMO, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
So when I was looking you up to prepare for this interview, I stumbled upon the C Realm podcast, which seems to go way back. And actually, on that podcast, the website for it, that's where I discovered the most interesting bio that you have. And it turns out that you have a pretty fascinating backstory. Do you ever talk publicly about any of that, or is that just kind of like hidden in the deep web?
Oh no, it's in the deep web. It's a story I've told many times.
Okay.
Retelling it is not super interesting to me. I think the bio you found is one that was written by Doug Lane.
Okay, I know the name. I'm not sure. Is he a science fiction guy?
Well, he has written novels that he calls science fiction novels. To me, they're more like sort of postmodern literature novels. But he's an editor of Zero Books. And
okay. Yes, I
don't know what his podcast is called these days, but it started out as the Diet Soap Podcast. And he started podcasting basically following my lead. I started in October of 2006, and I think he started in early 2008. But I'd been doing it for a while, so he discovered my archive and burned through it. And he's when he tells the story, he says like he'd been a few episodes into it when he just suddenly figured out, wait a second, this is just some guy. He's not he's not working for any organization. There's nobody funding him. It's just a dude with a pickup truck and like when I first started, I didn't have reliable home internet access, and I would drive my truck to the Panera Bread Company in Bentonville, Arkansas. And sometimes I'd sit out in the truck, and sometimes I'd go in and buy a coffee, but I would just use their Wi-Fi to record interviews. So I recorded many an interview in the truck.
2006. When was Joe Rogan's podcast started? It was after that, right? Wasn't it like 2011 or something? So you beat Joe Rogan to this.
Oh yeah, he's a newcomer to this.
When you started that podcast, was there, who was listening to podcasts in 2006? Did you find an audience, or how did that work?
It's kind of a painful subject because when I got started in podcasting, I was with a hosting company called Podomatic, and their listener stats were totally inflated because they were counting hits by search engines to your feed as a listen.
Okay.
And there were lots of people who thought they had tens of thousands of listeners, and they had hundreds of listeners. So that was kind of a shock. But no, it was really, podcasting was totally different then because nobody knew what it was. So if I would approach somebody and ask them to do a phone interview, nobody was asking them to do that. So like on my second or third show, I interviewed Moises Naim, who was the editor-in-chief of Foreign Affairs magazine at the time. And I knew to interview him because I had heard an interview with him on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. And I read his book, and I posted a nice review of his book to Amazon, and he wrote to me to thank me. And so, a few months later, I was starting a podcast, and I wrote to him. I said, hey, would you do an interview? And he said, yes. So like from the beginning, I was getting really, really excellent interview guests. And these days, a couple of years ago, I was the hired voice on a podcast called Padverb, and I had a whole team of people doing, production, which is basically just trying to keep the pipeline full. And it was really hard. And the guests we were getting were hit or miss. Some of them were really good, but some of them, it was just somebody to talk to. So, now that everybody's got a podcast, it's much harder to get guests.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So C Realm, I think that it looks like it stopped around 2023. And so you started a new podcast, the KMO podcast, right? Do you still do anything with C Realm, or have you sunsetted that project?
This is just laziness on my part. I don't have access to the C Realm RSS feed anymore.
Okay.
And getting it back is just a matter of investigation and whatnot, and I just haven't done it. But I'm actually also distancing myself from that whole project because I was a doomer for quite a few years, and most of my audience, like when I was at the peak of my listenership, most of the people who tuned in were there for the doom, and I'm not serving it anymore. So,
Okay, well, we don't have to get too much into that. I will maybe drop a link to the See Your Own podcast. You can track it down pretty easily too. So, but it's got a great bio. You've traveled the world. You've done a lot of cool things. You were an early employee at Amazon. There's a lot there. There's a lot there, folks. Check that out. It's good. And it does, maybe one more note there is it looks like you created a book out of some of your interviews from the See Realm podcast, and you can still find that on Amazon today. So there's a lot of content there.
It's like $50 a copy on Amazon. I'd be happy to send anybody one for like $5 plus the postage. I got a couple boxes of them left. The book is called Conversations on Collapse. And even at the time, but like put the book together, I think in 2010. And even by then, I was starting to hedge on the whole collapse narrative. The final interview in the book is with John Michael Greer, the former archdruid. And he had a peak oil rap and a collapse rap, but his rap was, hey, it's going to take a couple hundred years for this civilization to wind down. And people who are saying it's going to happen next year, that's alarmist. And I was like, there was a period where I was down with the alarm. And by the time I interviewed John Michael Greer, and then by the time I put that book together, I was already starting to say, looks like we're in for the long, sucky collapse, rather than the romantic fast collapse. Because romantic fast collapse is awesome. Your bills go away. You don't have to go to work. You might die. You might get eaten by zombies or whatever. But all the things that make life in modern industrial society shitty, they just go away. And that's probably not going to happen.
There's a little bit of just the typical masculine fantasy. Like my podcast co-host on Team Futurism, he has his getaway truck. He's got like his guns. He's got like his plan. He's like planning to like buy some land out in the middle of nowhere in California. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there is this masculine urge, and he can wax poetic about that too. I have a lot of friends who are kind of in that realm, so I totally get it. I'm like the opposite of a doomer, and we're actually going to probably get into that a little bit in this conversation. In fact, let me go ahead and jump ahead to a recent article that you wrote that was titled "America is Nobody's Kest." And in this article, you introduced this concept from Star Trek called the Cohort. And let me actually go ahead and read a quote from that piece that is actually quoted from Star Trek.
Okay, before you do that, I want to say this is from a Star Trek novel from the early 80s. And it was from a period between Star Trek the Motion Picture, when we saw the new Klingons for the first time, but before Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, where we had major Klingon characters like Christopher Lloyd playing Captain Krug. So there was this period of a few years where we knew the Klingons were new and different, but the new canon the new lore hadn't been established. And there was a gaming company called FASA, and they had a Star Trek tabletop role-playing game. And one of the guys they had developing content for it was the author of this novel. His name's John M. Ford. And you're going to introduce the concepts. And when the piece you're going to read from is like piece 2 of 3. It was a sequence of 3. And in the first one, I spelled Comorex wrong because I hadn't looked at that novel in 30 years. These were just concepts I haven't been thinking about them for 30 years. They just popped into my head again a few weeks ago, after decades, after one reading. Yeah. So anyway. Proceed.
Do you have any idea if Star Trek, if they continued this concept forward, or was it just...
They did not. That's the important thing. The Klingons that people think of these days, they're really from Star Trek The Next Generation. And Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and Voyager, but from that era. And that totally ignores everything that John M. Ford and other people sort of came up with, for the role-playing game and for this now non-canonical novel. So the Klingons in this novel are much more sophisticated and much more interesting than what they turned into later.
This is one of my favorite things about big, huge worlds that exist throughout different generations, and different authors pick them up at certain time points. There are all these just like loose threads that anyone could go back and they could pick them up and run with them. At one point, I was working on a biopic screenplay for Stan Lee. Didn't go anywhere, but I was kind of hired to like write a Stan Lee biopic, and it was so fascinating because there's so much richness to like any of those comic book epic worlds that just like no one knows about. They just get totally forgotten. But like there's a treasure trove of just like little loose ends. So I guess this is sort of a loose end, and maybe you're carrying this forward, which is great because it is a great conversation piece for the modern day. Okay, so here's a quote that is from this Star Trek novel. We have a word, Comorex. Your translator has probably told you it means empire, but what it means truly is the structure that grows. It has an opposite, Kesterex, the structure that dies. We are taught that there are no other cultures than these. Okay, and so you bring this home in terms of like modern America. Go ahead and kind of spell that out for me a little bit, and how you are making use of this term, Comorex, the structure that grows, and Kesterex, the structure that dies.
Okay, so I don't just apply it to America. I think of it in terms of complex adaptive systems. So a complex adaptive system is a system that it is sensitive to its environment, it responds to its environment, but it is composed of lots of little agents, different varieties of agents. And you cannot tell, just looking at the individual agents and their behavior, how the interaction of their behaviors is going to manifest system-wide. So you get emergent
Hmm.
behaviors out of complex adaptive systems. And there's an adaptation cycle from a related sort of field of thought called panarchy. And
Hmm.
it's like a figure eight on its side, a lazy eight, and it's like you can map it onto a four quadrant graph. I pasted it into the chat over there on Substack, but you've got a growth phase, or I like how some people label it an exploitation phase. Basically, you've got more resources than you need, and it fosters a lot of growth. And so, in a growing complex adaptive system, you get not only emergent characteristics and behaviors, but you're also forming all sorts of new connections between different parts, which leads to the emergence of different behaviors. And you're basically just building complexity as long as you have plenty of whatever resource it is to work with. And then you reach a culmination stage. And in this culmination stage, it's like a climaxed rainforest ecosystem. It's like there's so much going on there. There's so many interactions. It's so interesting and dynamic, and it's also very stable. It is homeostatic and it is resilient.
Hmm.
But after a while, those new connections they sort of ossify, and what used to be adaptive becomes maladaptive, and the system becomes brittle. And then, if you start to run out of that initial resource, or if it's not being utilized effectively, if the brittle connections, which are not really useful as they used to be, if they're still gobbling up a lot of resources, then your whole system gets brittle and it is primed for a collapse. And then eventually it does collapse. But at the top, you're tempted to keep layering on new complexity to sort. And this is bringing in the work of Joseph Tainter now, the author of the Collapse of Complex Societies. And Tater's point is that in the past, adding layers of complexity to your civilization solves problems. And as long as you can
Hmm.
afford it, great. But there comes a point where you can't afford it, but you can't see that you can't afford it. And every organization's primary directive in existence is to perpetuate itself into the
Hmm.
future. And so each little organization, each little node between the connecting fibers in this structure is prioritizing its own continuation over the health of the structure. So you basically get a lot of overhang in your society, and it's eating up more and more of your resources. And eventually, it will collapse. But the longer you prevent it from collapsing, once collapse is necessary, the worse the collapse will be. So it's like forest management. If you just don't allow forest fires ever, you put them out as soon as you can, but you don't have a robust system for cleaning out all the accumulated fuel for the next big fire, eventually you're going to have a really big fire. And the more successful you are in putting off that big fire, the worse it is when it
Hmm.
happens, or like a market crash. The longer you can uh, jigger interest rates and introduce new government interventions to prevent, you know, completely overvalued assets from crashing in value or to finding, their actual market price, the worse the market crash is. But the crash is just it's a little tiny squiggle in this big figure eight. So after the crash, then you swoop back over to the upper left quadrant, and this is your your reorganization phase, where basically what was happening before is wrecked, but you still have people, you still have knowledge, you still have resources, you have what you need to create a new system. And it is in this reorganization phase when it starts to happen. And then that takes you down to the lower left-hand quadrant, which is again this exploitation phase where things get ramped up again. And I would say, and I map this onto the Strauss and Howe generational cohort theory, the four recurring generations, that we're in this fourth turning now. We're past the peak of the height phase, the glorious interconnected like climax rainforest phase of the civilization, and we're in the stage where we're trying to put off the collapse, and the longer we put it off, the worse the crash will be. And
So, like looking at just particular societies, I mean, there are no empires really left, even though there used to be a ton of empires. The British Empire is just done, right? Effectively. I mean, they still have, you can still like see the effects of the British Empire all over the globe. Absolutely. But they're not exactly collecting taxes from Canada or whatever, let alone the United States. So, and the idea would be that it was just too complex to maintain. Would that be the story that you'd be telling there for if you were just to look at the British Empire?
Too complex for the amount of resources they had to direct to it.
Mhm.
But to say we don't have any empires left, I mean, I don't say this in a political way. I'm not like George Lucas. I think, unfortunately, as much as I love Star Wars, has cemented in everybody's minds that empire means villains.
Mhm.
An empire is it is a structure that organizes lots of different nation states under one umbrella and provides a wider arena for cooperative interaction. So the United States keeps, we police the oceans. The US
Mhm.
Navy is bigger than all other navies combined, and the United States does make transnational shipping safe for everybody.
Mhm.
Piracy is extremely rare. And that hasn't been the case for most of human history. So you can say, yeah, the US doesn't demand tribute from Australia, or the US isn't going and forcibly taking conscripts for its military from Pakistan. But in most respects, the United States is a functioning empire. And
We determine the rules for trade because we allow global trade. Yeah,
right,
that all makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And like, I don't think Trump has threatened to like explicitly threatened to leave NATO, but if the US leaves NATO, what is NATO? I mean, it's done. It's it might exist in name. There might still be offices. They might still have meetings, but it's not any sort of deterrent to Russia. And I forget who said it, but an early, I think it was a British official said, the whole point of NATO is to keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out, and keep the Germans down.
Mhm.
So we don't get a repeat of the German rise, and the Americans don't head on back to our lovely insulated island with oceans to the east and west and weak states to the north and south, where we're completely safe, from invasion. Um, so there is an explicit acknowledgement that the United States must stay in NATO for it to be NATO. And to me that just says, yeah, it's because the US is the top of the global imperial org chart.
Mhm. Well, I want to focus a little bit on America in particular because in your article, you talk about how Trump is the force that is Comerex, the force that is pro growing the structure, whereas Kamala, let's kind of forget about her because she's irrelevant. Let's just say the Democrats. The
Right.
Democrats are the force of Kesterex. And kind of just like based on vibes, especially like following a lot of the Twitter accounts that myself that are super like pro Trump and like, yay, like Trump won. Like there's all that energy is very like pro building the structure and like making
Mhm.
sure that it grows and doesn't become like some decadent declining thing. But like Yeah, maybe like I actually don't agree with this. I actually don't think Trump is like a pro structure growing force. I think that he's the opposite. But I think this could be interesting to talk about. I want to get your case on the table for why you think, like, beyond vibes, beyond like the vibes that I see on Twitter, because the vibes are real and they're strong. But like maybe beyond that, what's the case that Trump and Trumpism would be the pro America structure growing force?
So in terms of what I'm talking about here with complex adaptive systems and the adaptive cycle, just saying Trump is the force of Kesterex or Comerex. And somebody's complained to me that Comerex and Kesterex, being completely made up words in an alien language, just don't really communicate anything. And I think this will help people remember. In this Klingon culture and language that John M. Ford made up, the word Kest by itself, Kesterex is the structure that dies. Kest by itself would be our equivalent of bitch. Like, I'm going to make you my bitch.
Hmm,
So a Kest is something that allows itself to be dominated, basically.
hmm.
So comb is in Comerex, to me sounds like God Crom, strength. So, I mean, this is just trying to get the feeling for the words into people's heads. Comerex is growth. Kesterex is the little bitch, basically. So, what was your question?
What's the
Oh,
case
right. What's the
for
case for
Trump
saying that
as like that?
Trump
Yeah.
is the fourth of Comerex? Okay, so Trump does not think in terms of complex adaptive systems.
No. I mean, no politician does, right? At some level, probably.
Elon Musk does.
Okay. Okay.
And Elon Musk said the quiet part out loud a few weeks ago. He said, "Yeah, we're ready to get back to this new phase of dynamic growth. There's going to be, an unfortunate period where things get worse first." And I'm not trying to do an impression of Elon, so he didn't use those exact words and he didn't emphasize it the way I did. But he basically said, "Yeah, in terms of like, eggs being too expensive and whatnot, yeah, it's going to get worse for a while before it gets better under our plan." And that's because you don't go from the top and then fall off from your previous high right back to the beginning of the growth phase. There's that whole underside of the figure eight. So you got to go through the collapse, then you've got to build for a while, you've got to reorganize and innovate, and then get back to that lower left hand part of the graph where you start to swoop up again. And it seems like Elon Musk understands that. Trump doesn't.
Hmm.
um you know th- Now I'm going to bring in a little bit of John Michael Greer, who says, his rap is that the United States and global industrial civilization generally is going to undergo this long period of catabolic collapse, where the system basically eats itself. You have a little like a catastrophe and collapse, but then a partial recovery. And during the partial recovery, it feels like you're back to growth until things, go off the rails again, and you have another collapse. And it's this sort of stair step collapse over the course of a century or two, from the complexity and the technological grandiosity of our current situation back to something more like 17th or 18th century existence, basically, with very little electricity, very little motorized transportation, lots of people working in agriculture. Um, you can map the adaptive cycle onto that stair step collapse. The adaptive cycle, you can sort of tilt it on its side and send it rolling down the stairs, such that during your after the crash and your recovery phase, it feels like you're going up again. And there are tricks that financial tricks, government tricks, short-term stimulus boosts, things you can do to make it feel like growth has returned again. And if you're a politician in his second 4-year term, you don't have a whole lot of incentive to plan for effects 10, 15, 20 years out. You want to fix things now and get people praising you now. And so I think there are things Trump could do to bring down the cost of gasoline or whatever. And I'm certainly not making light of anybody's financial struggles. I am not a wealthy man by any stretch. I don't have a car, and it's not some enlightened choice. I just don't have the money to buy one right now, and the last one died a few years ago, and I just never replaced it. So
Same.
yeah. But I don't know. I can ramble.
Okay, well, let
Anyway.
me pause on one of these. A thought that keeps cropping up into my brain when I'm just comparing Trumpism to the Democratic Party, where like I live in California and we have spent untold billions of dollars trying to get ourselves a high-speed rail just between like our major cities, which like duh, of course we should have that. Like, come on. And it's gotten like half a mile of track that's unusable or whatever, like in the middle of the state. So that is because the Democrats have there's so much complexity in terms of like the regulations and all the
Mhm.
contractors that these people are speaking to and giving money to and it has made it so that the system itself it can't do anything. We can't build anything. And it's just because we have hemmed ourselves in so much with so many like well-meaning but it turns out like destructive regulations, right? And so, like Elon Musk, and so even like Ezra Klein in the New York Times is saying this is a failed system. We have failed, and it feels like failure because it is failure. And he says like we need to just like make if we need to get rid of regulations and let Elon Musk and Trump like do some wrecking ball shit. Like let's go for it. Like Ezra Klein is saying this in the New York Times. So this is real. This isn't like made up and just like Republicans being irritated at Democrats or whatever. Like that's a real thing. So I will totally grant Trump and Elon the blessing to go forward with some sort of project that will get rid of whatever stands in the way of America not being able to build anything because it's bad. It's very bad. And if we can't build anything, we're stagnant. And by definition, like America is an anti-stagnant project. Once we become a stagnant nation, we're done. We have failed. Like our project has failed, right? My qualm on the other side of that, I'll throw this at you too. Maybe I want to see like how you can respond to this as however you like. But my qualm is a little bit that even the fact that Trump hires or I don't know if hires is the right word, but like brings on board someone like Elon Musk in a non-democratic fashion to make up a fake other like a realm of bureaucracy to just you know further Trump's agenda to be a minor, mini king, that itself is an agent of chaos and destruction, and it's destroying the foundations of our democracy. Just like that in general, like if the Democrats had brought on George Soros to be a wrecking ball cause in our country, like Republicans would be losing their minds, right? They'd be losing their absolute shit over that. And that's kind of like where Democrats are. Where like we kind of actually do like Elon Musk because he's done so many like pro-environmental things, etc. But the fact that he's just being, the mini king, he's being set up for that role is part of this broader problem with Trumpism. And I'll end my kind of ramble with this is that there are a lot of articles being written right now, like in the Atlantic and New York Times, about how Trumpism is bringing in a kakistocracy, which is a government that is run by the worst, least qualified, and most unscrupulous citizens. Just go down the list of who Trump is bringing into his administration. Even if these people are like competent in one realm, they have zero experience in the realm that he's bringing them into. And so Elon Musk, he's never worked for the government. And yes, he's been very successful in some things. Also, like he's been horrible at other things. And you can kind of like just follow him on Twitter for 2 seconds and see that he signal boosts conspiracy theorists and he says, oh, that's interesting. The things that are just like blatantly false and wrong. And he is just an agent of chaos in his own little kingdom that he's built with Twitter, and it's lost like $40 million or whatever. So like it's a failed project unless you look at it as something that he was using to subvert our democracy, and he's using it as like his newspaper effectively to get his little king hired so that he can put his king in place so that he can be the mini me to the king, which is bad. So there's a lot there. I'm not sure how coherent that was, but what are your thoughts to all of that being like Elon Musk kind of good, kind of bad, but Trumpism scary kakistocracy?
Elon Musk, yay. Trump, whatever.
Do you find his anti-democratic instincts scary or worrisome or problematic?
Okay. You used a phrase just in passing. You said our democracy. To me, our democracy is in the same bucket with the science. When somebody says it, I know they're speaking a different language from me. I don't want to say nihilistic or pessimistic about democracy, particularly democracy in the United States, but um, it'll sound nihilistic to somebody who uses the phrase "our democracy." Criticism of democracy is as old as Western civilization.
Mhm.
Plato wanted nothing to do with it. Socrates thought it was a loser. That it always gives way to tyranny.
Mhm.
I mean, just like clockwork. I think what we have in the United States is, I guess, a plutocratic oligarchy, with a thick layer of technocracy spread over it. And we have these democratic rituals, but we are a democracy in name only, and that's a good thing. It allows the United States to continue. I mean, it is sort of a bribe to the people, or it is a way to get the populace to think, yes, I'm invested in this. Yes, this represents me. But no, the system represents itself. And as long as the Pakistanis are not stealing too much, it works. And it works for everybody's benefit, in spite of the venality of the people at the top. But there comes a time when it does get rigid, it does ossify, and it has to correct. And that's the Strauss and Howe, the seasons of the saeculum. We have spring, summer, winter, and fall, or fall and winter, and at the end of winter, things are just wrecked, and it happens like clockwork about every 80 to 85 years.
Mhm.
And we're exactly like at December 28th in that secular calendar. um, we are in for a rough ride. I'm hopeful that AI and rapidly advancing scientific knowledge and hopefully technological applications that flow from that will cushion this this crash or this really rough fourth turning, and that it won't be as bad as the Great Depression or the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, which are all at these roughly 80 to 85-year intervals from one another. But in terms of democracy, there's a great episode of Star Trek: The Original Series where Kirk and Spock are in jail on this planet where everybody's really primitive, and it turns out that it's a post-nuclear war civilization where you've got the Yangs and the Combs. Remember that? So the Yangs were the Yankees, the Combs were the communists, and they hate each other, but they don't remember why. Their civilization is in ruins, and Kirk and Spock are in jail. And in the next cell over is this Yang guy. So Yang is in Yankee, and he hasn't said a word. He's basically this animal just staring at him and growling. And Spock says something to Kirk, something about, we're going to have to get working if we're going to regain our freedom. And this guy hears that word, freedom. He says, freedom? That is our worship word. You will not speak it. And I thought that was just so brilliant, that Star Trek in the 60s has identified, at the height of the Cold War, when, open like anti-patriotism would certainly not be allowed on network television, particularly in a popcorn show like Star Trek, but they worked it in there. This idea that these phrases, independence, liberty, freedom, these can become vacuous worship words for
Mhm.
people who just don't have any clue as to how to make sense of the world, but they cling to these phrases as just symbols of their tribe. And, to me, that's democracy's right up there. I think if we had an actual democracy anytime in my lifetime, we would be in utter ruin right now. And I'm just, happy that we haven't had to go through that.
I mean, our system works. I know that it's not like a pure democracy. Obviously, like we're a republic. And I mean, at the local level, you vote for your mayor, you vote for your city council, you vote for your school board. Those are real votes. Those are real people. You kick them out if they do, bad things, because, it's easy to find out because they're literally your neighbors, your kids literally go to schools. And it is that system just on a broader scale. When you look at the federal system, it just becomes more corrupt because there's more money involved. And if you get someone like Donald Trump, who just like watches someone on TV and says, "Oh, you will be faithful to me. You seem like a loyal person to me. I'm gonna have you in my administration." I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Like that's just corruption. That to me, like I I know that like saying our democracy, I kind of like get that as a good point. But like just corruption, no matter what the system is, I think corruption is kind of like gross. And I see a lot of corruption in Trump's administration. Not that Democrats don't do corruption. Clearly they all do. It's a human problem at some level. But Trump, to me, why he makes me so irritated in kind of like a traditional normie Dem way is that I just see like it's not just corruption, it's like blatant, like in your face, I'm gonna do this because I want to do it. I can shoot anyone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, corruption. And to me, it's like at least just be sly about it or something. Like it's so gross, and it puts grossness into the system, into the actual like cogs of the system, to be that I think over the top corrupt. I don't know. What's your like actual feeling on Trump and your hopes or fears for the next 4 years? Then we can totally move off the political angle. But I'm kind of curious because you're a libertarian. Not have a lot of time for libertarianism. Tell me like if you have any predictions or just like your general feelings about the upcoming 4 years.
Well, I mean, I would be quite wealthy if I could predict the future. I cannot, and I have been taken in by very plausible sounding predictions in the past, like the whole peak oil fast collapse story. So
Mhm.
I don't present myself as an oracle. In terms of like what I want Trump to do and not do, I think Rand Paul made a very excellent point, and I absolutely agree. He said, like, somebody had floated the idea of using the military to do a mass export of, illegal aliens. And Rand Paul's like, if nothing else, that's a bad look. But it's worse than that. I mean, that's not what the military is for.
Mhm.
And turning the military into a domestic police force, even if it's supposed to be temporary, that is just a bad plan. And I absolutely agree.
Mhm.
And he said, look, just make it police work and focus on criminals first rather than, just finding anybody who doesn't have their paperwork in order and shipping them off to some place that they don't live, you know, particularly if like somebody's been here for several years and they have kids. Those kids are American citizens. They were born here. And anybody who says that, because their parents were illegal, those kids are not natural, Native American citizens, they are. They just are. And you can't kick them out. And if you're going to kick out their parents, particularly, their parents who might like own a home and work a job and pay taxes, that's insane. I
Mhm.
have no truck with that notion. But at the same time, uh, Bernie Sanders had this right back before, back in 2016 when he would talk about immigration. He'd say, look, you bring in low skilled labor, that drives down the price, that drives down the bargaining power of American workers. People who already live here, who are at the bottom of the skill and pay ladder, will get paid less the more competing labor you bring in. That's not rocket science. That's not it's not crazy ideological talk. That is just simple supply and demand from a democratic socialist. The next election, he got the woke virus, and he completely changed his tune on that. But yeah, the situation as it has stood for the past 4 years in terms of how easy it is to come to the US and just latch onto the teat, which is dry for the people who are already here, that that cannot stand. But it could also accelerate the collapse. So
Yeah, it's
if
interesting.
I'm
Boy, I just I was mentioning that I just had an interview with Brian Kaplan that will drop before this interview, and
Mhm.
he makes the case for why we should have open borders. And I guess we don't have time for a true like borders talk right now, but I don't know enough to have a strong opinion on this. Everything that you say, it makes sense, and I know that it's a real feeling in America. Obviously,
Mhm.
we just voted for that. Brian Kaplan's or case is a very strong like we need open borders, take everyone, here's why, and he's an economist and very explicitly lays out how everyone benefits from that. But yeah, I don't I'm not him and I can't exactly
Well, that's a very
reiterate his
doctrinaire
point, but
libertarian position. But
mhm.
with that, I mean, I haven't read the Libertarian Party platform recently, but when I was voting for people like Harry Brown back in the '90s, that was an explicit part of the libertarian
Oh,
package
interesting.
was
Okay.
open borders. But to do that, you can't have social services.
Yes, exactly. You're right. I mean, this is why Europe can't get away with it, because if someone comes over and crosses the border and comes into Germany, let's say from the Middle East, and they're 65 and they don't want to work, they just right then want to start taking tons of social services, that's going to collapse the system. And we're already kind of seeing that. But maybe, and the libertarians would argue, if everyone who comes over from Syria or wherever is 18 and they're immediately going to enter the workforce, that's a different story. Then all of a sudden they're paying into the system, they're also buying groceries, and then maybe everyone wins. But yeah, if you come to Europe and you're over 65 and you just want to start collecting government benefits, you're going to collapse the system. And we have some of that in America too, where we want young people to come.
I will say, throughout the industrialized world, people have forgotten how to have babies. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
so bring in young people from Latin America, and they'll make more of themselves, and their kids will be, native English speakers. That's a win. Yes, I'm
Hmm.
all for that. I live in a small town in Arkansas, and we have a Tyson chicken plant here, and the only white people who work at the plant really are management. Everybody else is Latino. And I live just a few hundred yards from this soccer field where on Sundays they play, there's like adult leagues that play. They play all day, multiple teams, one after another. And everything is in Spanish. All the players are speaking Spanish. The refs are speaking Spanish. Everybody watching is speaking Spanish. But the kids, like the dog park is right next to that, and I go over there and I take my dog, and the kids come over to see the dog and pet the dog, and the kids, little kids, they all speak English.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would not say kick out all the Latinos. This town would
Mhm.
be just worn out and old and desiccated and lifeless without that community. So there's not everything that I'm saying is in terms of either complex adaptive systems or supply and demand in terms of worker, the ability of workers to get what they need to live out of the system. But in terms like on Substack, it is not hard to find people who are openly racist, openly nationalistic in their
Mhm.
racism. And these are not dumb people just, shouting slogans. These are very intelligent people making
Yeah.
complex arguments. And I follow them and I like a lot of what some of them have to say, but I can't follow them there just because, aside from just basic fairness, um, like I said, this town would be lifeless without the Latino
Yeah.
contingent. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to pivot to effective accelerationism, which you've written
Hmm.
a little bit about. And I have not actually gone back and reread your articles somewhat recently, but I remember when I read them, I was very fascinated. You seem like you are maybe hesitantly in favor of effective accelerationism. Is that fair? And how does this how do you marry your ideas about EAC with your doomerism that you're maybe still coming out of, but it's still present for
Oh
you?
no, I'm long out of the doomer phase.
Okay.
Um, I think if there is a collapse, it will be short lived and onward and upward from there.
Oh, okay. Okay. I that wasn't clear to me. Okay, that's great.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. What's the
And
question
is
again?
that because of technology? Do you think technology is going to help us come out of that collapse?
As I mentioned before, I hope that the collapse is softened by technology, and that
Mhm.
the period for like the refractory period before the civilizational hard on gets going again will be shorter.
Mhm.
It'll be a Viagra for our society. Um, but in terms of acceleration, I mean, what's the alternative?
More regulations,
Right. So
or avoiding
legislators.
doomer scenarios through regulations and thoughtful, baby steps into the AI age, maybe.
Mhm. So, do I think that there are legislative bodies which understand cutting edge information technology and neural networks and AI safety concerns well enough to tell the people actually developing the technology how to do it? No, I mean
No.
EAC all the way, of course. Who is going to be better able to engineer AI safety than the people building AI?
Mhm.
I mean, the idea that like Donald Trump is going to do it. I mean, no, that's just a non-starter. I mean, it's not that it's like, do I advocate the sun coming up tomorrow? What's it matter? What
Mhm.
does it matter if I advocate for that?
It's
It's going
gonna
to
happen.
happen, or
Yeah.
if it doesn't, holy shit.
Do you,
So,
I know that you play around with a lot of the AI models. Do you have a favorite? Do you,
Claude,
prefer Oh,
Claude,
Claude, okay, okay.
absolutely
Tell me
Claude.
about that. What do you prefer about Claude?
I just like the personality of it. I like its voice. I like the fact that you can feed huge amounts of, information into it.
Mhm.
So, if I read a Substack article that I like, I'll just cut the whole thing and paste it into Claude, and we'll talk about it for a bit, and then I'll grab another and throw it in there, and then I'll grab 2 or 3 of my own and throw those in there, and I've got this whole big long meta prompt that I give to Claude to tell it, one, don't be an HR nanny state, woke scold. I have no patience for that. Don't pretend that that you can be comfortable or uncomfortable with the topics. You don't experience subjective states of comfort and discomfort. I basically call out all the bullshit, tactics that these models do to
Yeah.
refuse to talk about certain topics. But then I also throw in the primer on Comer X and Kester X and adaptive cycles, and I say this is the framework in which I want to discuss things. And here's 5 articles that I read on Substack today. Let's talk. And that's so much fun. I just love doing that.
That's
So,
great. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mostly have been married to ChatGPT,
I just
but
hate the house style of that thing. I
I
just don't like
know.
it.
I don't love it either. I think that I've just out of convenience, I've been kind of stuck to it. But okay, I like that. I want to try that with some Substack articles. I'll give it a whirl. Speaking of Substack, last couple of minutes here, I just want to talk to you about what do you think the future is for the whole online content ecosystem. You're someone who's been around for a while. You've done writing on multiple platforms, and you've done obviously podcasting since the Stone Age. Right now, I feel like we're in this strange place where every writer has now kind of pivoted to Substack, and now it's becoming bloated to the point where it feels more like Medium now, where you have to weed through so much garbage to like find good content or good people, and even the best people seem to be spitting out more content than they really need to be just to like keep their followers happy. It doesn't. It already feels. I was so hopeful for Substack. I still am, but it already feels to me like it is like having some growing pains. Also, like the feed on Substack, I see the same 3 to 5 people on there on the feed because they're just trying to like grow their audience, and so they're just like posting nonstop, and then the rest of the people are kind of like checked out from the feed, and they're just writing their content, which then their you know audience doesn't really grow as quickly. At the same time as that is happening, we have like the people fleeing Twitter for Blue Sky. Supposedly, I know that you mentioned that you are on Blue Sky now. I also just this week I got my Blue Sky account, and I have thoughts about that. But and then also there's obviously Threads. It seems like there's a fracturing happening. It also feels like if you are a content creator, you're probably still just drawn to the same platforms as everyone else because that's how you grow any sort of an audience, but it also feels kind of gross maybe. What are your thoughts there, and how do you see the content platforms, microblogging, how do you see them moving forward? Do you think we're in a good place right now, or do you think that it is like bloated in the way that I kind of see it?
That is a tough subject to bring up at the end. I have a lot to say on that. I like long form writing. I like doing it. I like reading it. I really enjoy the Substack feature. Like, I don't know how it's implemented, but on some accounts, and mine's one of them, you can post, 2, 3,000 word essay, and there's a little play button up in the corner, and an AI reads it to you. And I listen to Substack articles while I walk my dog. And my dog walking is a serious endeavor. It's my primary source of fitness, so it's not a casual thing. Um, I like that. I'm drawn to that.
Mhm,
I go on, like, if I took Twitter off my phone before Elon Musk bought it. I don't like that platform.
mhm,
I've never really liked it. I tried for a time. But I've got a couple thousand people who supposedly follow me, but if I post something, it gets 30 impressions. That's irritating to me. And
Mhm.
just the vibe of it, just the people performatively attacking other people with just very superficial and intellectually dishonest tactics is just gross. I just don't like
Mhm.
it. And sometimes I'll read a long Twitter thread that it's thoughtful, and I'm like, why is this on Twitter? Why don't you just you know post it to Substack or post it to WordPress or whatever people use for blogging, and then post a link to it from Twitter? Because
Mhm.
I don't want to try to scroll through like 10 different tweets with other people's comments, and it does not seem like an appropriate platform for that sort of communication, and yet it exists. It's popular. Elon Musk paid $40 billion for it or something like that. Um, I don't like it. I just don't like
Mhm.
it. And Blue Sky, you've mentioned, I mean, it just seems to be a clone of Twitter. Like
Mhm.
it looks like old Twitter. I think that's intentional.
Same
And
with Threads. It looks very much like that. I mean, microblogging has not really evolved. I mean, for decades, aside from like a couple of features that are new, like spaces where you can just like hop on a chat with somebody. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it hasn't really evolved.
yeah, what was it? Clubhouse during
Oh,
COVID.
Clubhouse. Yeah, it had a
That was
moment. It almost was, and then that
it did.
that
It
kind
had
of
a
like now
moment.
is Spaces.
Yeah, but I don't use Spaces. I don't like. For me, Twitter is or X is. I write something on Substack, and there's a button after I post, and it says "Share to Twitter," and I click it.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's it. I just don't like that platform. And there are people that I recognize on it. Like when I go there, there is an account. I know you know of it. It's the AI not kill everyoneism memes based Beth Jesus.
Oh yeah. Oh yep.
Yeah,
Yep. We talk about him on here every now and then.
I enjoy that. When I do end up on Twitter, I seek him out and I read the most recent memes. Not a high volume poster. Um,
He gets me excited about Trump. He's the one account that makes me just kind of like, yeah.
yeah. I have to say this. I was listening to a conversation of yours. I think it was with your regular co-host, and he just repeated verbatim a lie about Trump. I mean, there was a basis in fact, but it was so distorted as to be a lie that Trump said Liz Cheney should be put in front of a firing squad.
Yeah, I know exactly what we're talking about. He didn't say that.
He didn't say that.
He was riffing Trump style. I actually like almost corrected him on that, but I just let it go. That sort of thing does bug me too. Yeah, and this is maybe why I do like I don't even know. I don't know. I like long form podcasts, as I was going to say, because you can correct those things. Although I realize that I'm saying that in the context of me having not corrected that thing in a long form podcast. So, well, there we go.
What do you think of the community notes feature on Twitter now?
It's pretty good actually, but you do see it make mistakes. And
Hmm.
then just today, just this morning, someone was saying, like sharing a Twitter notes saying like, how do you correct a note when it's wrong because there was a wrong one? So
Hmm.
it's imperfect, which it's gonna be,
Is
but
there a mechanism?
not that I know of, although I've never looked actually.
Hmm.
But I do see it every time I see it, and it's making a correction. It tends to be useful. It tends to be useful. It tends to de-escalate fires rather than escalate them typically. So I am actually in favor of it, although I haven't actually done like a deep dive on it at all.
So, what's your experience with Blue Sky?
So Blue Sky, so far, I have only followed a couple of accounts that I also follow on Twitter, and you do see people posting like clones of their Twitter content.
Hmm.
But supposedly it's like the liberal haven or whatever. I don't know. Like it doesn't seem from what I've seen, and I have not spent that much time there. It does not seem that ideological. I know that I'm sure there are super ideological corners to it, as there are everywhere. But it seems like just the feed that's just giving me is pretty neutral content from accounts that I'm sort of vaguely familiar with. Anyway, I think that if I spent more time there, I probably would get irritated with the liberal bias. For some reason, I find the conservative bias less aggravating than the liberal bias, even though I am liberal. Maybe that's why, because I don't know. Like the thing that frustrates me is I feel like communities are fracturing right now rather than coming together. And the places where they should be coming together, like Substack, they feel very bloated and already like desperate. There's a lot of desperation in the content community right now. Like there's so much like look at me energy that I just don't really like. Because I'm someone who, like, to be perfectly honest, I would never post to Twitter or anywhere like that. I would just doom scroll every now and then for entertainment and to catch up on drama in the world. But I only post just to get people to read my articles or to like listen to my podcast. And I hate having to do that. Like I wish I had like a marketing company that would just promote my articles for me, so I would never have to do anything. But it's kind of cool to like post an article and you get people commenting on it and you get like engage with people who read your content. That is very cool. Like, but yeah, I don't know.
I've thought of an answer to an earlier question that you asked that I evaded it. You're asking about the future of online content creation and distribution and whatnot, and also I would say hopefully community formation. And there's a lot of desperate look at me energy because people want to get paid.
Yeah.
They want to create a large enough audience that they actually, lucky people might make minimum wage writing for Substack. A few lucky ones who got there early or who are just really, really good and really consistent, they're earning like what an engineer might make, like a engineering school graduate. It's not the path to riches, but there's a book by Kai-Fu Lee. You probably know of his book, AI Superpowers. You heard of that one?
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he wrote one after that. And I think it's just like the name of a year, like AI 2051 or something like that. I mean, that's not the right number, but it's a future year. And instead of it being sort of this academic text like the previous book, it's vignettes. It's like fictionalized stories set in this future. And a couple of them really deal with okay, we've got mature AI now. It's better at everything than people. What do we have people do?
Mm-hmm.
And I forget exactly why UBI doesn't work, but there's still this search for a way to employ people, just because people will not accept just being charity cases and having the AI provide for them. And so like, there's a company that employs a whole bunch of people, and somebody is interviewing them and asking, what is it that you do there? And they describe their activities, and she's trying to figure out, how this generates economic, value for the company. And the answer is it doesn't. It's really just a big daycare center for adults, and it makes them think that they're working. Well,
Yeah.
imagine everybody who wants to be a content creator gets their UBI and a very convincing AI audience to tell them how wonderful their stuff is, or to tell them that they're an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
In equal measure, or whatever mixture of oh you're wonderful and oh you're an idiot, works for that person. And the AI knows their psychology very well, and everybody gets to walk around, and be an influencer and take their own picture, at the tourist attraction sites, and they honestly believe that yes, I am one of the top creators on, and maybe they are. Like there'll be 100 different platforms that people are posting to, or 100,000 different platforms, and yeah, you really are number 3,500 on your platform of choice. You have actually 4 human followers, and none of them have checked your account in the last couple of months, but you have this army of fake followers that are all just AI bots that tell you how wonderful you are and what a beautiful picture that is, and how blessed you are, how whatever it is you're looking to project, they say to you, yes, I'm getting that vibe from you. Right on.
There's something in there that makes me want to just return to sharing little pamphlets with your friends or something like that, which is maybe what maybe we should all be just zine authors at the end of the day anyway. Hey, well, that was a lot of fun, KMO. Thanks for coming on, and really quick, what are you up to now? What are you up to in the future? And where can people find out more about you?
Substack. If you go to KMO.show right now, that directs to my Substack.
Okay.
This is the beginning of December. I did the NaNoWriMo thing, National Novel Writing Month.
Cool.
So didn't finish the novel. I got to 50,000 pages, but the story isn't there. Or 50,000 words, not pages. 50,000 words. But I'm writing a prequel to Fear and Loathing in the Kuiper Belt.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Hey, well, when that comes out, I'll have you back on, and maybe we can talk more sci-fi, which we didn't talk too much about today. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
I'm going to publish that together with a novella that I wrote called Last Train to Mordor. They both take place in the same universe. Last Train to Mordor is available on Substack. It's behind a paywall right now, but I can comp you if you want to read it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. That would be great. Yeah. The novella form is my favorite form of art, bar none. I think it's the supreme form of art. So yeah, I'm a big fan already.
Yeah, I somehow managed to focus on the plot for that one and not get lost in the world building, which is definitely where I am right now in this other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, I'm going to drop links to your Substack and some of the articles we talked about today. And thanks again for coming on the show. That was a lot of fun.
It has been fun.